First I saw the loveliest pool, this bathing luxury pool, the widest, roomiest pool. It was warm as summer sun, clear as any brook in a mountain. This pool was just like a fountain, a whirling, bubbling fountain. It was heaven, it was fun. The ultra bath, the ultra bath. I was bathing in luxury. Now at last I was really free in my ultra, ultra bath. Then I saw that I was right under a waterfall. I was under a gentle cascading wonder with the spray caressing me.
Welcome to And Ninthly,
an Inside Number 9 podcast.
with your host, me, David.
And me, John.
The ultra bath, the ultra bath. I was bathing in luxury. Now at last I was really free in my ultra, ultra bath. My ultra, ultra bath. My ultra, ultra bath.
Hi, John.
Hi, David.
It's a bit high energy there, wasn't it?
Oh, do you want to take it down a bit?
Hello, John.
Hello, David.
I like that. It's quite breathy. On that sexy note, welcome back to And Ninthly. We're here to not only talk about the episode that was on last week, the finale of Series 8 of Inside Number 9, but also to discuss what we thought of Series 8 overall and do a ranking of things. Yeah, I mean, I will talk about the episodes in general, but how have you enjoyed Series 8, John?
Oh, we're going there straight away, are we?
Well, just without specifics on the episodes, I guess. So, has it been a fun process doing this, being subjected to this?
Very much so. Yeah, I've enjoyed watching it and I've enjoyed discussing it.
It's been a good run. Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. I think I've got a lot out of it, and it's been nice to have some guests on the episode as well. To sort of shake things up a little bit and make us less alone with our thoughts.
Oh, it hasn't done that in any way, shape or form.
No, you can't ask for miracles.
The yawning chasm of solitude still exists. Bear in mind, we still record these remotely.
That's true.
I still haven't been out of the house in a year, so...
John, 2020 never ended for John.
Oh, no. Well, yeah. Someone reminded me today, actually. In many ways, I kind of wish it hadn't, because quite often I'm out in town or just getting generally frustrated with other people. And then someone reminded me today about that time when we all went mad and just did constant Zoom meetups and Zoom drinks and Zoom quizzes. And I remembered how done with that I was by about May 2020.
In between polishing our fruit with disinfectant.
Oh no, I just drank the disinfectant.
I mean, that's I think Trump suggested that. That's good.
He did,
Yeah.
and I listened to almost everything that man says.
I was thinking of 2020 in terms of this run of And Ninthly episodes, because when I first started the EscapeGoat podcast, I was doing them basically in lockdown. As it turned out, it wasn't planned that way, but in lockdown, I started off by doing them one a week for about 8 weeks, and that was exhausting even in lockdown. But I had basically no other social options, as you say, apart from the occasional Zoom meetings and stuff. So, but even then, I had to stop doing that. And we've been putting out like roughly every week on a sort of roughly week schedule with normal life going on and everything, and it is killing me, basically. It's kind of, I'm actually really glad this series is only this long, because it's been really fun.
God, this series is over.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's just when you try to put out podcast episodes that sound even barely decent and kind of like get them out the door in a hurry. It's just I don't know how people do this. When they do like long-term podcasts that cover an episode per week and everything. It's I think someone with better planning than me might be able to do it. But
I mean, a lot of people do it professionally as well, or full time at least. It's this is being squeezed in around the rest of life.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I sort of suspect that people, it's not that this is a cheat code, and this sounds like I'm saying that these people have an easier life than me, but I think probably if you have kids, for example, you kind of know the nights when you're going to be at home, and those are like most nights, essentially, at least for a certain stage. So it's kind of, I think that's helpful as well.
Okay, so you're suggesting that having kids...
It's the easy option.
Can I just repeat what you've just said for the listeners? So any of you with kids who aren't spending at least one night a week recording a podcast, editing it, and then releasing it, frankly, are lazy. Lazy, good for nothing, shirkers, layabouts, adding nothing to the world. Sure, you've produced a couple of kids, but like, what else have you produced?
Yeah, excuses.
In terms of content. If you're not producing content, then I don't know where you think your value in this society is.
God, neoliberalism's really turned me into a monster, hasn't it? Or at least covering this show has. Speaking of monsters, so let's talk a little bit about
segue. Oh, you're getting good at this.
Just in the nick of time for the end of the series. Let's talk about last week's episode of Inside Number 9. This aired on the 25th of May, 2023.
Nailed it!
Nailed it is generous, but yeah, did it anyway.
But you're going to edit that pause out. That pause will go in the edit. That's the beauty of doing it yourself.
It's true. So this is the episode of the last weekend, which caps off Series 8. I'm not. I guess I'll start this time because I think I made you go first last week. I wasn't really sure what to make of this one. I've seen it now twice, as I do with most of these before we record them. I enjoyed watching it the first time round, but because, for reasons we'll talk about, obviously it leaves the sort of episode it is leaves a fairly nasty taste in the mouth, I'd say. And on this rewatch, it might be because I've had we were talking before on just off mic about how I've had a bit of a stressful day each, basically. And, I've been a bit tired. On this rewatch, I think, as a starting point for the discussion, this episode kind of left me in a slightly bad mood.
Can I also just repeat for the listeners what you told me in that you had a slightly bad day at work and you came home and rewatched this episode of Inside Number 9 while having a bath?
Yeah. That is probably worth mentioning.
And you're going to suggest that this has actually put you in a funk in some way. I mean,
well, Johnny,
physician, heal thyself, I think.
Well, the bath did make me feel much better, but John, until you mentioned that just before we started recording, I hadn't really connected those two things, which I know sounds unbelievable, or at least very stupid, but I was watching it in the bath quite happily and, not really aware of the irony. So that's the kind of day I had where my mind was working on not quite all cylinders, I think.
Well, also because you wear that oatmeal face pack every day anyway, so that also wouldn't have occurred to you as any kind of similarity.
Yeah, that's the same. So I think when we get into the episode a bit more, I'll talk more about why it maybe has left me slightly, I guess, disturbed partly by it, but also maybe a little bit hostile towards it. We'll get into that.
Interesting. Can I just jump in on that? I think I had the same feeling. On the first view, I think I had very much the same feeling. It left me feeling, well, bummed out for starters, but also, just left me in a bit of a bad mood. I wouldn't necessarily say hostile, but it left me with kind of a lot of, I don't know. It certainly didn't leave me feeling as hostile as last night at the proms, for example. But it had a whiff of last night at the proms for me, leaving me slightly uncomfortable and not really sure what to make of it.
I'm glad you brought up last night at the proms, actually, because I remember enough about our discussion of that, I guess, nearly 2 years ago now, that I remember that leaving you that feeling, and I was thinking actually just earlier today like that this might be my equivalent of that, so maybe we're more on the same page for this. Did you, I wonder where to start with this one. You were talking before about how this episode is a revenge tragedy in disguise, isn't it? That's the
Oh,
twist,
it's not even in disguise. It's not even in disguise now.
Initial disguise, I meant. Sorry.
Okay, the initial disguise. Yeah. Before we go there, do you mind if we talk about what happens before that? Because I think it's actually very interesting up to the point at which it becomes clear that's what it is, and then it goes in a completely different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, on the first and the second viewing, I had some more so on the first viewing, because as we know with Inside Number 9, there's often a huge paradigm shift once you get the twist. What I did really like about it, but I think why it was leaving me quite depressed, is actually its treatment of death or of illness, of someone facing death and the loved ones around them. And I thought it was handled very interestingly, actually, up to the point at which we realise that's not what is going on at all. I actually thought some of those moments were really quite profound, and quite touching in terms of two people who are trying to negotiate this situation where, as they believe, one of them is potentially not going to be around for very much longer, and how they feel about that situation, and how their loved ones feel about that situation, and how, relative acquaintances, the housekeeper, feel about that situation and what they have to offer. So I think on the first viewing, up until the reveal, I think I was actually struck by the quite serious nature of how they were dealing with that, and that obviously is a very depressing topic, and I think we can say flat out there's not a lot of gags in this one, if any at all. So I think we've now gone pretty much 2 straight episodes without any gags in them, possibly even 3. Love is a Stranger is not even that funny, really. We've gone 3 straight episodes that haven't realistically been particularly funny.
Yeah, following on from this one that was an out-and-out farce, or arguably, they've really put the sour back into it, haven't they?
Yes, you've got 2 in there. You've got, I'm going to do it, Paraskevi-decatriophobia, and Mother's Ruin. Well, the second half of Mother's Ruin, maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe not even that. Question, is this their least funny season?
It might be. It's funny, what is funny is you were talking about looking at the last weekend as maybe, like what it's initially trying to do, or, what it looks like it's trying to do, and sort of appreciating aspects of that. I was talking to a friend over the weekend who'd seen this episode, and she was expressing that she kind of wishes that they'd just done that. She sort of, at least in some levels, I think she was kind of thinking this should be like, was it Love's Great Adventure, that one they did that was... had elements of ambiguity to it, but was basically just a sort of domestic kitchen sink drama. She kind of was digging that aspect as well, I suppose, and kind of, we'll talk about what actually happens in the episode, obviously, but she maybe thought it wasn't that successful, and she would have preferred that version of it, I guess, if she could see that version. So that seems quite close to your take on that aspect, at least.
Yes, but they get to do whatever the hell they want. That's the that's the joy of the position they're in, is they get to tell the story that they want to tell, and that obviously was perhaps there was an element of interest in telling that story or touching on those themes, which, let's be honest, they've danced around. I mean, let's go back to 12 Days of Christine, where we're in total end of life territory there, aren't we? And albeit in a much more supernatural way, people dealing with mortality and death in various ways is not unfamiliar territory to them at all. But I guess I don't think we've ever seen someone who has an illness that's potentially going to end them soon.
Oh, well, actually, so first thing I want to mention is this put me in mind of Christine, and it was the way they used the stages of grief framing stuff, to sort of as a loose sort of frame to hang the episode on for most of it. That put me in mind of the sort of month by month thing in Christine. But actually, they have done something a bit like this, because do you remember there's that I can't remember the name of it now, but the Talking Heads-esque episode with all the sort of different talking heads.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's the cream cracker behind the sofa, isn't it? Is that the one?
That's the Talking Heads episode. Yeah. It is probably that. Yeah. Deep cut for the Alan Bennett stands up.
Oh, David, do you see what I did there?
Shearsmith in that one plays a character who's dying, genuinely in that episode, I believe. So I guess that's where they've most gone to this well. But obviously that being the other actor. I liked it as well. I like the way they were building that up, and they were, as you say, dealing with quite heavy stuff. And I think on rewatch especially, I enjoyed quite a lot of what Shearsmith was doing in his performance in terms of being the genuinely grief-stricken partner. I think there's other things to do with the performance that we'll probably discuss separately, but I was enjoying that for obvious reasons. On the rewatch, I was watching Pemberton much more closely, and I enjoyed that as well. I think there's some interesting moments in there when you know the twist, so it works on that level. But in its actual form, I suppose, in what it's actually doing, we both mentioned the riddle of the Sphinx, didn't we?
Yeah.
We mentioned that in messaging. One of the reasons this episode it leaves me a bit cold, I suppose, is that I think it's another one of these ones that I mentioned. In fact, I think I mentioned it in terms of Riddle of the Sphinx initially. Do you remember when we came to the episode Misdirection that was all about magic tricks and everything like that? And that's also a revenge story, basically, with this sort of clever conceit, and all that sort of stuff. I think this is another, for me, amongst the other things it's another example of them going back to the well a little bit. And I was just thinking, you were saying, it's quite a dour episode, it's quite a relatively humorless episode, and obviously a nasty episode in terms of the twist. I think it's also, you forget how much fun there is in the Riddle of the Sphinx. It's a really fun, entertaining, theatrical episode that's never boring.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this is boring. I basically don't think any of the Inside Number 9s are either bad enough or long enough, apart from anything else, to be boring. But it's not leavened by that kind of fun, is it?
But in a way, maybe you can't have that both ways. Perhaps what you're saying is, if they are returning to the well, then they're doing it differently. They're saying, okay, let's play this as straight. What if we were to do an actual revenge tragedy that wasn't offset by that humour? And in a way, the setup of Riddle of the Sphinx and the theatricality of it and the size of the performances, in a way, makes the ending less horrific because you're in a different universe. You're in a slightly more cartoonish world, whereas there's no cartoon element to this. This is straight up, the same as we were talking about that we've talked about other episodes before. This is in the world that you live in. This is something happening in the world that you live in. And if you think back to, oh God, what's the name of the basement one?
To Have and To Hold.
To Have and To Hold, thank you. If you think back to ones like To Have and To Hold, for example, there's nothing there to cling on to about this not just being the world that you live in, and it's basically rubbing in your face that the world you live in is this shitty. It really is this shitty, because this, okay, these may be exaggerated versions, etc. But as we know with To Have and To Hold, that sails uncomfortably close to real life events that we know of.
Yes. Well, I think a criticism of this episode could be, and I have a few different criticisms of different levels of it, really. One of them that occurred pretty straight away was, because you say obviously it's set in our world, it's set in a sort of sober world, that kind of thing, and deals with real relationships. It also, though, is arguably a thing that's probably never happened, right? Just in terms of the actual specifics of this plot, it's like it borders on the actually outlandish, I would say.
It does, and I'm going to come back to talk about that once we get on to my thoughts about this as a revenge tragedy, because I think that's crucial. And I think actually between the first and the second viewing, I think that changed my opinion of it enormously.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, I suppose a way to sort of tiptoe towards that is I thought an interesting thing about the rewatch was you talk about real relationships, realistic relationships being portrayed. I like the way that when you know the twist, one of the fun things about the rewatch is watching a loving couple bicker becomes different. And I say this to the episode's credit, I actually thought this was good. Becomes very different if you know that the underlying dynamic is that one person actually loathes the other person.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting, and again very dark and disturbing. But that's something I got a lot out of on the rewatch in terms of rewatching both of them, but rewatching Pemberton obviously especially. I thought that was interesting because you can watch, couples in real life or couples in comedy or drama bicker, and if you think there's love behind it, irritation but mutual love, that's one thing, isn't it? But I thought that was interestingly twisted.
Yes, it is, and also the same as with not all, but most episodes of Inside Number 9, the rewatch really rewards you with, seeing how individual lines are very carefully crafted with the reveal in mind. So, relatively innocuous lines like, why are you pampering me? I should be doing this for you. And Steve Pemberton's character saying, oh no, you deserve it. You really deserve it.
Yeah.
And it's just the malevolence that comes through in a previously innocuous line. And this is, that's where they eat. That's they could do that all day long.
Well, he has a line as well, doesn't he, about, what do you know about being so angry that it drives you mad, that kind of thing, which was also fun. I think also just the, because there are scenes in this where they're an old couple bickering about very silly things, like picking a fight, as Chaz has it, and they're arguing about that. That's like schoolyard rhyme, for example, the milk lemonade one. And
I meant to ask you, what did you say at school?
I don't think we had a version of that, but I think I've seen it mentioned more in like American shows and stuff as round the corner fudge is made, which I don't think is exactly a version they quote in this, interestingly. So there's at least 4 versions extant, I suppose.
Yeah, well, they kind of... God, I was literally about to say they kind of fudge that, but I cut that out.
No, we need some jokes, John.
They do say that... Doesn't he say, "Oh, I've got an American friend who says push the button, fudge is made"?
Yes. I'd never heard quite that version, but I'd heard something closer to that.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. Milk lemonade, round the corner, chocolate's made. That's absolutely what it was. Why would it be round the corner chocolate cake? It doesn't make any sense. But I think we've talked about this before, actually, with earlier in the season with Good Morning, Mr. Magpie, and about how it's really interesting that sort of colloquialism can vary regionally, and as your life expands, and particularly when you go to university and you meet people from different parts of the world, that it opens things up to you, where you realise that the essence of those colloquialisms is often there, but just not necessarily in the same order.
I thought another great thing about the twisted second viewing, I guess, of it is a moment not only when the characters are seemingly being cute on the first viewing, but also where you're enjoying Shearsmith and Pemberton having fun is the dance, the Blue Jean Baby bit.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? That hadn't even occurred to me. That's very similar to, you're going to have, my memory's terrible, you'll have to remind me again, the Psychoville episode.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember. Death
Be Not Proud. Death Be Not Proud. When they do the little dance at the end, and as I think we commented at the time, it just looks like that's them just pissing about and making each other laugh. And to an extent, I think that was what was going on there. While we're on that bit as well, I suspect we're going to jump about a bit, but I found very interesting in that on the rewatch, the lyrics to that contains a line about his flies. It says, and when she passed by, I popped my flies. Now, obviously it rhymes with eyes and absolutely fine, but just the way that they're even dropping in those little clues, those little hints, because again, I think I'm going to have to make this a habit. The second viewing I did with the subtitles on, and it's very, very obvious, obviously, in the sound design, but you know what? Because they have to actually caption the sound design, the phrase insects buzzing must have come up at least 12 times during that episode. So like right from the beginning. So to just have a little, I sometimes wonder if they've done like neuro-linguistic programming or something. I sometimes wonder if they're actually trying to get to us subliminally with these things, or to what extent they are trying to do that and just put these images of flies in our head. But I don't know. Maybe they'll let us know by osmosis.
Yeah. No, it's unnerving, isn't it? Because, obviously you tend to associate buzzing flies with, I guess like horror and kind of decay and, like that kind of things, like The Exorcist and stuff like that, so it's kind of, as horror fans, they'll know the, not only the plot stuff they're leading up to there, but the sort of mood that creates, We were talking about their sort of cabin on the lake episode, weren't we? And I don't think this probably didn't turn out anything like what I was expecting, to the extent I was expecting anything, but, they're definitely doing horror here, let's put it that way.
Yeah, they are. They're doing a version of horror. As I say, they're actually doing a very traditional, well-trodden form of horror that goes all the way back to Seneca. Seneca, the tragedian rather than the philosopher. You're going back to a Roman playwright from. Oh, why didn't I look this up before and write it down? Seneca from whenever Seneca is from. Don't write in.
Is there a way to guess what they're doing? I suppose this is another way of asking. Did you guess what they were doing with this before you see the bags of cement?
No. As with Inside Number 9, you're kind of always waiting for the shoe to drop. As with, the delight of 3x3 last week was the sheer adrenaline pumping through my body because I wasn't really sure what the hell was going on, and I couldn't see where they were going with it until relatively late in the day. And the same with this. I couldn't see where that was going. Now there was one misdirect that briefly made me think something kind of supernatural was going to happen, and that's when Molly, the housekeeper, she's chatting with Chaz, and she plays with the necklace that she's got, and she has this little glint in her eye, and she kind of goes, well, you don't know, miracles can happen. And I was like, are they going to go down some weird magical realism
like she's a witch or something like that?
Well, yeah, I didn't know if something supernatural was going to happen, and obviously that could go in numerous different directions. So actually that kind of misdirected me enough. Yeah. I don't think at any point it occurred to me that A, he was faking his illness, and B, that this whole relationship was a sham.
I think that's a bit of a misdirect as well, though, or rather it's unsettling the way, on rewatch I spotted this really, that she just sort of disappears at that point as well, like I know that's editing, but you don't have to show every character leaving or whatever, but that's, you don't see her drive away from the lake or anything like that, and it's kind of, there is a plot reason for that, you learn later, that she's been, literally been dismissed between scenes. But that's slightly unsettling as well. She does just sort of disappear from the episode, so but I think because I've just realised before you see the bags of cement, you see Pemberton just before that, putting something in his drink, and I think even before that, Shearsmith is getting very drunk and sort of woozy, and that I think that was my first hint that there might be some deception going on between them in that sense,
Yes, yeah, there was the phrase where he says, "Oh, I'm a little bit tipsy." I mean, I'm not going to claim more knowledge than I actually had at the time, but you do see the status shift, and quite often what it is with Inside Number 9 is watching how the status of characters and how they're interacting with each other shifts over time, and you see it time and time again. So when you've watched as many of these episodes as closely as we have, I think you're very alive to those tiny little status shifts that make you, sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're right, that make you think, oh, hang on, which direction is this going in? And I think that moment of, him being a little bit tipsy, because up to then, Chaz had kind of been the one who was keeping everything together, right? And as the quote-unquote healthy person in that relationship, then that would make perfect sense, that he was the one who was trying to keep everything going, and the one who's concerned about all the ants and the cleaning and all of those things, whereas Joe is much more relaxed about it all, as a bit more carefree. But then that almost immediately shifts when Chaz becomes a little less worried about everything around him, and you kind of see you get that glimmer of Joe kind of taking control, and you think, oh, that's interesting. Joe's taking control. So
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's taking that pampering, isn't it? You know, like when you are in a relationship and you submit to being looked after, essentially, whether it's, you know, long term or just a difficult day you've had or whatever. You know, you're also putting yourself in a state of vulnerability.
Yeah,
and that's, you know, most relationships that have healthy room for that. But obviously, this shows, you know, Chaz is literally at his most vulnerable without knowing it. You know, and it makes that very sinister. It's one of the ways in which it takes things about relationships and about the intimacy of relationships and the trust of relationships, I suppose, and really uses them to stick the knife in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a way of disarming someone in order to do exactly that, to stick the knife in.
Well, talk about sticking the knife in. Do you want to talk a little bit about tragedy then? Because there's another aspect of the episode I want to move on to talking about.
Sure. Okay. So it was originally written in the 70s by the Bee Gees, but it was most famously covered by Steps in, I think, the late 90s, which is interesting actually, because if you think about Steps, I guess the closest comparison here would probably be H from Steps.
That's an amazing link.
Thanks very much. Flippancy aside, actually, I guess one of the points I wanted to make, which I'll do that first because it's slightly more frivolous, is I wonder how much I don't think intentionally, I think they're certainly conscious of and making a little nod towards the amount of boy bands in the 90s who had closeted gay members, or who had gay members of the band who, I think they explicitly said this about Take That, didn't they? That, you know, we need all of the young girls to believe that they can sleep with you, so none of you can come out. None of you can tell them that you're actually not interested in girls, because that would ruin everything. And I thought that was an interesting little nod to that, and the nod that they make to that is, I think, is very clear in the lyrics of "She's My Blue Jeans Baby." It's, you know, that the song is very clearly a heteronormative,
unconvincing straight love song.
Yeah, there we go, that's a better way of putting it, an unconvincing straight love song, basically. And I just thought that was an interesting little detail when it came to the song, that I picked up on.
That's really funny. I was on Canal Street this weekend, so in between my first and second viewing of this, so I was basically listening to quite a lot of songs that were designed in the late 90s for an audience of young girls and gay men. So it was kind of, you know, I was really sort of like indulging in that, taking a dip in that scene, if you like. It was interesting to watch in between the two watches of this.
Taking a dip in the canal? Is there actually a canal in Canal Street?
Yeah, next to it, yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I've been to Manchester many times, but I don't believe I've been down Canal Street.
Well, let me introduce you to a canal next time we go to Manchester. He said non-threateningly.
Non-threateningly.
Let me pour you a bath, John.
Yeah. How long have we been doing this now, David? It's coming up for 3 years, isn't it? So I guess we've got another 6 to go until we discover which one of us is wreaking vengeance on the other.
Which one of us has bought the cement?
Tune in 6 years, listeners, to find out.
I like to think of this podcast as the audio equivalent of quick drying cement.
If only they weren't like over a fucking hour long each time. I think that's a very
slow drying,
generous idea of quick drying. Talking about a 28-minute TV programme for sometimes up to 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, don't let me distract you from tragedy. Anyway. So,
it's very interesting because it, as I say, it wasn't really until in between the first and the second one that I kind of went, oh, what's this? What's this reminding me of? What bells is this ringing for me? And it is just, it's a classic Elizabethan, if you like, revenge tragedy in the style of it kind of starts with Thomas Kyd's the Spanish tragedy, and that is an obvious leaping off point for Titus Andronicus, which then leads to Hamlet, and you know they become the big boys, I guess. You've also got the Revengers tragedy, and in that period of Elizabethan theatre, it was just very very popular, and it was a very popular dramatic technique. As I say, it kind of comes from Seneca and the Roman dramatists from, I don't know, we're around 5 BC or something like that, I guess. Please please don't anyone write in to correct me, just Google it. But it kind of comes back basically in Elizabethan drama, and as we know, Shakespeare kind of takes it and runs with it. And there's a lot of things in common, and I start thinking about it quite deeply and kind of going back to various resources from when I actually knew stuff about drama and didn't have to look it up. But quite often what you get, the thing that you've got in common, the first thing you've got in common with all of these revenge tragedies is a really gruesome ending. Okay, they all have in common a really gruesome ending. Particularly, let's take Titus Andronicus, for example. The revenge itself is really horrible. And there's a trope within the revenge tragedy where the revenge is almost always worse than the crime itself. Or at least exceeds the crime in its sheer bloodiness and bloodthirstiness. And one could argue that this definitely does. So, for example, Titus baking Tamara's sons in a pie and making her eat it. It's, we're at that level where it's real horror. And the design and the imagination of the torment that Joe comes up with. Now, he goes back to say that it is, I'm going to have to look this up, Shapism?
Yes, damn, I will look this up.
Shafism.
Shafism.
Scapism. There we go. So he goes back to talk about scapism, and how the Persians had this form of execution that involved sending someone out, or taking someone to the side of the river and covering them in honey and basically letting the insects at them, basically, and letting them eat them alive. There's actually a reference to that in another Shakespeare play, a very late play called The Winter's Tale, where Autolycus tells the story about what's going to happen to someone when they find out that Perdita's fallen in love with the prince, and he talks about, he'll be anointed over with honey, set on the head of a wasp's nest, then stand till he be 3/4 and a dram dead, etc., etc., where he is to behold him with flies blown to death. So again, that's obviously something. There's obviously something about this form of punishment, of execution that has passed down. And I think from what I read that many of the reports of scapism had come from Plutarch, and we know that Shakespeare was very, very familiar with Plutarch, and he took lots of his stories from Plutarch, so that's no surprise there. That's in terms of the form of the execution. It's usually brutal, and it's usually very, very gory, and this is. Some of the other things, however, that came to me is quite often you've got the revenger quite often plays a level of subterfuge. Now, with Titus and with Hamlet, they both pretend to be mad. So they, in order to exact their revenge, they spend quite a lot of time pretending to be something that they're not. So, with Hamlet, it's his antic disposition, and Titus does the same thing. Now, with Joe, he doesn't pretend to be mad, but A, he pretends to be terminally ill, and B, he pretends to have a sexuality that he does not have.
Right. Well, that's a whole conversation.
So let's come back to that.
Yeah.
Going on what he tells us, or going on what he tells Chaz, that's what I'm going with as my working hypothesis here. That he says quite explicitly, "I did things that I am not proud of. I did these things, and I didn't tell you I love you because I did lots of things, but I wouldn't do that. And I'm now going off to live with a woman who I met." So we could get into the nuances and grey area of that, but for my hypothesis regarding the revenge tragedy, it kind of ties in for me with the whole, and in order to exact their revenge, they have to play some kind of subterfuge, where they have to be something they're not. Now, lastly, one of the other things is that in a lot of revenge tragedy, you get ghosts, you get the dead come back to kind of make the punishment that much worse. I don't think it's a coincidence that he takes out the picture of Olivia, his dead daughter, and places it directly in front of his eye line. I think that's a very clear reference to this style of drama where you are confronted with exactly what you've done. Other parallels, you can look at Titus and what happens to his daughter Lavinia. It's often about daughters. It's often about kin that they're avenging. You've got a parallel with Ophelia in Hamlet, who does take her own life. So I think there's parallels all over the place here that brings me back to the belief that whether very, very consciously or just by half design and half accident. And again, they've done a Commedia dell'arte episode, for goodness sake. I don't think it's a stretch to say that they may well have sat down and gone, let's write a modern revenge tragedy. And modern revenge tragedies also aren't unique. I mean, Tarantino, spaghetti westerns, you've got all sorts of legacy from that kind of peak style of drama in the Elizabethan age. Thank you for listening to In Our Time. We'll be back next week when
very illuminating.
Well, I'll be joined by several guests, and we'll be talking about the successful 1990s pop group Steps. Thanks very much.
Yeah. There should be one about that. Well, I'll tell you what. Because you were sort of skirting on that, talking about deception and, role playing in terms of revenge. I do want to talk about the sexuality thing, because we sort of fainted at this a little bit when we were talking about Love is a Stranger with George, didn't we? Yeah. All we knew about the episode at that point was that they were playing a couple, they were going to this cabin together, and we talked about how that's relatively rare to see them in that. Not quite unprecedented, but rare to see them do that. And we wondered how that was going to go, and I think we all said it'll be interesting to see how they play that, what they do with it. Mm-hmm. It was indeed. And I think I really want to talk about the sort of the playing gay. And as it turns out, obviously there's this wrinkle in which one of the characters is playing gay. We didn't see, couldn't have seen that coming. But I want to talk about, about the character of Joe and his disgust, I guess. Because I think that's, I'm not actually, and I don't mean this, I'm pulling my punches. I'm still thinking this through, and might be for some time. I'm not saying this is a homophobic episode of Inside Number 9, but I think it's playing with some of that. Well, it involves Joe's disgust, his loathing of this particular gay man who appears to be actually gay, unlike him, it seems, and he's loathing. Let me be careful about this. Shearsmith's character Chaz is a guy that we meet who is, well, A, quite camp, B, quite mean, and I mean that in a significant way. Not just catty, but we was mean on the internet. And obviously, that becomes a key plot point. Added to that, when we discover that Joe really, really hates Chaz, he's moving on already. Creating the next stage. There's an interest. I'll stop in a minute and get your thoughts. But there's the loathing that a very traumatized straight man could develop against a gay man is what this episode's about. I guess I'll just say that, and I think that's interesting when Shearsmith and Pemberton, as far as we know, are two straight writer performers playing around, not only playing. Seemingly both playing gay in this episode. I think basically you can say that Joe, amongst all the other things, he's mad, might also hate gay people, or at least now he does. But that's not the same thing as them being homophobic creators.
Now.
I know that's a lot all tied up in that.
No, I think it's really interesting, and I think there is stuff to unpick there. And I hope this doesn't sound like I'm taking the coward's way out, but that was not my reading, because my reading was one that was more aligned with everything I've just talked about he hates this man. I don't believe he hates gay men. I don't believe he's got anything against gay men. The facts are these. He blames Chaz for his daughter's death. He blames Chaz directly for leaving a message or for posting on MySpace or whatever. Oh, MySpace. Do you know Tom? I know. Tom's a mate of mine, actually.
I will have to explain that to anyone of a certain age.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not of a certain age.
He hates this man. So the facts are that Chaz has in his bitterness at his failed career, has left messages on the site of young people who are also trying to do the same thing, who are trying to have pop careers, saying, "You're fucking shit, you should kill yourself." And it just so happens, once that's happened, Joe, quite rightly, blames Chaz for this. Quite rightly. There's another argument to have there.
To a degree.
To a degree. To a degree.
Quite rightly.
It makes sense to Joe to blame Chaz directly for that. I don't think it would matter. I think if Chaz was straight, Joe would have found a different way to do it. I think the fact is he was presented with, in the world of the story, he says that he went to find him when he was at the Purple Sock doing a public appearance, and he saw what his strategy needed to be, or he decided that that's what his strategy needed to be. And I don't necessarily buy that it has to do with Joe's attitude towards homosexuality. I believe it has to do purely with his attitude towards Chaz. And he says that I've done things I'm not proud of, because he's done whatever he needed to do to the extent of going against his sexuality. Doing a physical act that may have made him uncomfortable, because that is not the sexuality that he believes he has and identifies with.
Well, I know it's not a family-friendly program. Clearly, if that was ever true, this episode is one to say of. But they don't go into this detail as well. But obviously, some forms of sex can be tied up or mixed up with angry feelings and aggression and things like that. Then there's, he had. I mean, let's not beat about the bush. He, at least for a while, he was fucking Chaz. And that's he's been. That,
well, we know they've coupled.
Yeah. Like Austin characters would say.
That much we know. We know that they've coupled, but like you say, we also know that they haven't done it for a while. And again, there's allusions to that about they were meant to go to Iceland or wherever it was for the spa, which then actually becomes the whole plot point about how he's going to kill him, and he says, "Oh, I couldn't go because I was having treatment," and it sort of becomes clear that Joe's done what he needed to do to get in a relationship with Chaz. But here's the other level on this as well. It's not his punishment is not just the bath. His punishment is the last 9 years.
Yeah.
Like, his punishment is Joe sitting him down and saying, "Look, I've made you love me, and I don't love you. And I never said it. Did you not realise that? And I've made you waste your life." And actually, it's not just about the bath. It's about getting him to admit that he's angry about all the lost opportunities. He's angry about all the holidays he could have been on and all the men he could have fucked. Well, instead, he was looking after Joe. And again, yes, you can't entirely subtract one from the other, and maybe there are other kind of outside of the story questions to ask about why do you write this story, why do you go down this road. But if we're in the world of the story, I don't believe that Joe is doing anything other than what he needs to do to Chaz, and he needs to torture Chaz, and part of that is he wants to see the look on his face when he says the last 9 years have been an absolute waste of your life. And by the way, that life is now going to end.
Yeah, horrible.
Now, okay, I don't know if we even need to say it's 9 years, kids. Can you see what they did there? But also, I think there's a really interesting point there about relationships generally. It's like, we've all been in relationships that ended, right? We've all been in long-term relationships that ended. Because those relationships end, do you kind of go, well, that was a waste of those years that I was with that person?
So it's like a cliche bit of breakups, isn't it? Like he or she wasted the best years of my life.
Yeah, but you kind of don't, because you know that at least you went into it willingly, or you both hopefully went into it willingly, and then it went wrong somewhere, and it didn't work out. But when someone looks you in the eye and says, no, you were getting into this willingly, but I, from day one, from before I even knew who you were, from before I even sought you out, and I sought you out to exact this revenge upon you. And again, it's very sophisticated, and it's incredibly brutal, and it's, it is... Is it arguably worse than the act that's the wrong that's been done to Joe, and the wrong that's been done to Joe's daughter and Joe's wife? I mean, I've done in our I've done in our time. We're not going to do the moral maze as well. There's no time for that. But I mean, discuss that amongst yourselves. But again, I think this is one of the interesting things about this episode, as I found with Para Friday the 13th, that there's this is why I love having these chats, because it makes me actually have to think about the thoughts that it's provoked, and the trains of thought and provoked. But please do argue back that you do think there is a slightly more unpalatable element to their relationship, or to the dynamic of their relationship.
Well, I'm not going back on it, but I think because I think I was barely expressing it full-heartedly anyway. But what I would say is, if they needed a defence for this performance and plot choice combined, I guess it would be that actually let's just take Joe as heterosexual. Mm-hmm. He's a monster. He's gone mad and he's a monster. Chaz is arguably a deeply flawed human being, but Joe's become a monster and he's the hetero guy. I think it ties nicely actually to Love as a Stranger. The predatory, the sort of the predator being revealed as someone who was posing as someone open to love. That's in there as well. I mean, you could actually say the grief of losing a child is actually in the bones of St. Nicholas as well. There's a lot of things kind of cropping up again in remixed form here. I don't think they're being monstrous, but I suppose, what I would say, actually, they're inviting the audience to consider how monstrous a heterosexual person might find gay sex. And I'm not even saying it's wrong for a heterosexual. I'm obviously not saying it's wrong for a heterosexual person to not want to have gay sex. Obviously, that's what we're talking about in terms of sexuality, people's tastes and preferences. But they are using it as a extent of a ridiculous length that he's gone to. And I think I don't want to get too far away from the word ridiculous actually as well, because we were talking about the plausibility of this plot. And I guess you could say, if we're dealing with like something akin to classical revenge, or a tribute to classical revenge tragedy, plausibility isn't necessarily our watchword here.
No, and I don't think buying a bag of quick drying cement and planning to bury someone in it and have the flies eat the honey off their face is terribly plausible either, or terribly convenient or terribly efficient if you want to off someone.
Well, I suppose the dark implication at the end there is that he is going to stay with him, isn't it? I think that's the implication. Is he's not just walking out the front door; he's going to keep him. Yeah,
he's gonna stay. Well, he's gonna stay, and he says, doesn't he, that there's a story of a man surviving this for 17 days is the longest this has been survived, because they, as mentioned in the quotes from Plutarch and from The Winter's Tale, is they fed them, they watered them, they kept them alive in order for them to be eaten alive by insects. So yes, that's definitely the implication.
You mentioned To Have and To Hold before. It strikes me that this is quite similar to that, in the sense that we find out, if we're to believe what Joe says, that his new partner, Mick, is unaware of Chaz's very existence, So in that sense, even though Chaz feels like he's been walking around as a free person in a sense, although as you say he's been trapped in other ways and feeling trapped in other ways, he's actually been kept in a basement in a sense. This is just the final bit.
Yeah, he has. There's one diversion here going back to the revenge tragedy theme, and I think again I am gonna bring it up again just because I think it's instructive, particularly in terms of Titus Andronicus. Like, it's objectively horrific what he does to exact his revenge, but he believes it's justified, whether it is or not. Well, it kind of is, but he exacts a revenge that you can argue is it more horrific? I mean, Lavinia's raped and has her hands cut off and her tongue cut out. So he takes the perpetrators and he murders them and he chops them up and he puts them in a pie and he makes their mum eat them, basically. It's horrific, it's gross. But the difference here, particularly with Hamlet, with the Spanish tragedy, with Titus Andronicus, with most revenge tragedies, they mostly end with the revenger dying. Because that's all he's after. All he's after is the revenge. And once the revenge has been exacted, then the spirit of those who he is avenging can rest, and therefore his work is done, and it usually results in him either killing himself or being murdered in some other way. Yeah. Now, the twist in this is that Joe is going to go off and have a life with a woman who is oblivious to all of this. And that does, I agree, that throws up many more discomforting questions. What does that life look like? What is he, is that, in what way can that be a moral decision to act in that way and then to live with someone? Because unless you know for a fact that person shares your worldview and believes that what you did was the right thing to do, how could you be in that situation?
Yeah, I was I told you about half an hour ago that on the rewatch I was watching Pemberton a lot, and there were numerous points throughout the episode, I think particularly when Chaz betrays bits of humanity essentially and suffering and vulnerability, and is telling Molly about his pop career and things like that, where you see Pemberton sometimes in plain view of Chaz, sometimes just off screen. You see him looking troubled or looking caring, I suppose, for want of a better word. And I suppose if you're to take this character at face value and take him seriously, what would it even mean for a character who's gone that far to have second thoughts, right, or doubts about what he's about to do? But I think there is space to think that he might, right up to the bath scene, basically, he's still capable of those sorts of second thoughts, or he's troubled by how far he's gone along this road, even though he ultimately does it.
No, I don't think he is at all. I didn't see any of that in the rewatch. I just saw absolute determination.
He certainly seems to be at peace at the dinner table on his own at the end, doesn't he? Despite Chaz's screams coming from upstairs.
Yeah, he's absolutely at peace. He's done his job. He's done his duty. He can finally rest. I going in a slightly different direction. I have a question for you about the style of the episode. What did you think of the I don't know what to call it, whether it's it's not magic realism, the Brechtian, let's call it Brechtian technique of having various items labelled with depression, bargaining, acceptance, etc. How did that work for you?
Well, I didn't think of this at the time actually, but when we talk about the Friday the 13th episode, do you remember they had the title appear across the gate?
Yeah,
it was kind of similar to that, wasn't it? And
I don't know that I agree. Actually, I think there was a little trick at the top that was quite a nice little visual gag. But this was threaded all the way through. This was part of the plot. This was part of the storyline because they're talking so much about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross book and the stages of grief being denial and depression and acceptance and bargaining, and anger.
I've got them written down here.
And anger. And right from the beginning, it's there in the first couple of minutes. One of the shopping bags has what's the first one? The first one. So it's again, I kept pausing it because I wanted to see what was actually on the shopping bags, and actually they're just Aklan. So they're just presumably I can't see an anagram or anything in there, so presumably they're just a made-up name of a supermarket, and then it turns into Denial Supermarkets, which I think was, the first little interesting visual trick. Is there anything in the fact that the honey that he pours on his face is called depression, and that's what he uses to pour on him? But I don't think it was unless it was hidden because it was badly, or because it was not well lit intentionally, that the cement was just cement. I kind of expected to see a name on the cement, but perhaps that would have been too far, because perhaps that's not part of the process.
It was, I suppose what I'd say, visually I didn't mind it, but I think, I was talking about Christine before, and the sort of, the months changing as Christine progresses. I think there's, because the whole structure of this episode really, as you say, it's engaging with the themes of loss and grief and, preparing to die, etc. But because all those themes are, they're real, but because that plot is a feint, essentially, the structure is kind of a feint too, in a weird way. That it's sort of a structure to hang the episode on, but it's also sort of having you on and even having that structure. So I think, to the extent that I think it's jarring, it's that you come to the end of the episode and you realise it kind of, is the episode about the 5 stages of grief? I suppose it is, because Pemberton's has been going through grief, and is this his, what stage is this we're watching? I guess they're all wrapped. People who actually talk about the 5 stages of grief tend to say that they're actually not meant to be thought of as sequential. They're all in there at various times. They come and go, they ebb and flow. But yeah, it was an interesting touch.
Yeah, I think perhaps it doesn't need more explaining than that as well. I think it was an interesting visual touch in what would have, until the very end, what would otherwise be quite a mundane episode visually, because they're just in a house, and you've got the illusion of flies buzzing around, and until you get that final image of him of Chaz submerged, then there's not an awful lot going on visually. Which is not to say, again, there haven't been other episodes that are visually less interesting than others by necessity and design. The other thing I've just realised I meant to mention, I know I brought this up at the time, but then the characters in the very first episode in Sardines, the characters that Pemberton and Shearsmith play in Sardines are almost the same characters.
Yeah, I saw someone commenting on that on Facebook.
They've got the same status, they've got the same dynamic. Shearsmith's got the very camp joie de vivre, cheeky chappy kind of vibe, and Pemberton has the slightly fusty, grumpy older man vibe, the much more patriarchal one. I thought that was quite interesting. I don't know if we know that we've got one more series to go, but I feel like, I don't know, how much are they kind of bookending things? How much are they making things rhyme? The fact that was the very first episode and this is the very last episode of season 8. I don't know how much that's in the mix as well.
Yeah, I saw someone say on the internet, they were saying, it would have been great if they would have the same character names, if they're literally meant to be these characters carried on. And someone was like, yeah, but spoilers, presumably those characters burned to death in a wardrobe, though, didn't they? I was like, oh yeah, that's how that ends. Yeah,
and and in a way that again, in a way that's a revenge tragedy. In a very strange way, where Tim Key is the revenger. He's the one who. He's not really pretending to be something he's not, though, I guess. He's, I don't think he's really hoodwinking anyone. Well, he is. He's
hiding in plain sight, I suppose, and he's getting close to a family.
Yeah, and then they say, "Oh, I've got to go and pick Mark, whoever is up from the train station," and then they suddenly go, "Well, if that's Mark, then who's this?" So actually, he's completely pretending to be someone else, isn't he? So maybe that's been there all along. Ooh.
That's a good one. I actually wanted to mention just before we move on. I guess I'll talk about just quickly a couple of league things in this that were brought to mind, like if you go back to the League of Gentlemen, because one of them I think I mentioned to you is the idea of kind of being a predatory person who hides away, who actually buries a gay guy alive, or sorry, not a gay guy in League of Gentlemen, a boy we're going right back to Hare Lip there. And Hare Lip is, for anyone who doesn't know, ladies and gentlemen, he is a monstrous, an outrageously caricatured homosexual character, and also an outrageously caricatured German, it's worth mentioning, who buries a boy that he's been lusting after alive under the ground with an air pipe and stuff like that, which this put me in mind of a little bit. And obviously that's a phase of their career where they're doing things that you could be much less charitable towards in terms of actually portraying gay people in a fairly insulting, tactless light. The other thing was actually lighter, was just the washed up pop star Les McQueen.
Yeah,
it's a shit business.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think they've got the trademark on washed up pop star stories, have they?
No, that's true.
But yes, that's an interesting parallel that's there. I guess a few final thoughts on the episode itself is the inevitable discussion of the supporting cast, and I hope you know where this is going to go already, David. So it's a double whammy. I think you'll find an unexpected double whammy, because I don't know if you noticed at the end when the credits come up, you've got Molly, who is played by Sheila Reid, and you've also got with the voice of Maggie Service.
I did notice that. Yeah, what were they referring to?
That's Alexa. So that must be who voices Alexa.
Oh.
Because it's the only other thing it can be. It's the only other voice we hear. It must be the voice that says, what is it? I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm playing Blue Jeans Baby, etc. Nice work if you can get it. So first of all, Maggie Service plays Elsie in the Doctor Who episode Deep Breath.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
But then we've got a big hitter. We've got royalty here, and I hope you're going to be excited about this. So Sheila Reid most recently appeared as Clara's Gran in The Time of the Doctor and Dark Water.
Ooh.
She was also Etta in Vengeance on Varos in 1985.
Wow.
And she has also appeared in a few audio stories. She is therefore considered to be one of very few actors who has performed across the versions of Doctor Who.
The classic series, the wilderness years.
The classic series, the audio series, and the rebooted series. So she's credited as having appeared in all three of those. So Sheila Reid very much is Who royalty.
That's very impressive. Well, I'm glad you did the research there.
Yeah, I'd like to one final thing as well, unless you've got anything you particularly want to bring up.
No, I think if I have final thoughts about this one, it'll be mentioned when we rank them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So obviously the very last line, which is very clever, where he talks about, I think it's quiche, isn't it? He's made quiche, and he says, "Do you want yours heated up?" And then he sits down and goes, "I think I'll have mine cold."
Yeah, that was a bit much for me.
Do you get it? What does it remind you of, David? What's the phrase?
It's about steps, isn't it? better best forgotten. That's what it reminds me.
Hey, nice. Well, obviously it's revenge is a dish best served cold.
Mm-hmm.
I'm disappointed to see by the lack of excitement on your face that you clearly didn't Google the provenance of this phrase.
What is that from?
I can't believe you're going to make me go down this road, David. Because one of the things I was going to say is, do you know you appear to have got through an entire recording of 6 episodes without mentioning Star Trek?
That is quoted in Wrath of Khan, of course.
Yes, it is, correct.
Yes, it is very cold in space.
It's where he turns to him and he says, "Oh God, I've lost the quote. I don't even know the quote. You should know the quote. Kirk, old friend, do you know the Klingon proverb? Revenge is a dish best served cold." Yeah. And it's a very knowing joke because, frankly, no one knows the provenance of it. No one can fully identify. It's not Shakespeare. It's not, as some people say, from Les Liaisons Dangereuses. No one really knows where it's from, so it's a nice little gag. And I cannot believe I mean, you missed a sitter there,
Yeah.
quite frankly, to use
Yeah.
a footballing term that I know we're both very familiar with.
Yes.
You missed an absolute sitter there, son. Absolute sitter.
This is what happens when you spend too much time in the bath and not enough doing research and.
Indeed. The other thing I wanted to very quickly bring up as well is, having mentioned Titus Andronicus quite a bit, there was a very famous production of Titus Andronicus that the RSC did that kind of, in many ways, sort of reinvigorated it. I think it was probably in the 80s, and a very, very lauded performance where Titus Andronicus was played by Brian Cox.
Oh, really?
And folks, we are recording one day after the finale of Succession, which I have been waiting for with bated breath and watched, and David
I've not.
has not got beyond about 3 episodes of season 1. So anyone out there who has got up to date with Succession and listened to all of these podcasts, can you imagine how fucking frustrated I am right now?
Yeah, just tweet aggressively at me. That's what I'm going to do, John. I'm going to spend 9 years not watching Succession.
Oh, what a lovely little treat. Oh, you monster. You absolute monster.
Well, now Brian Cox has got more time on his hands. Maybe final series of Inside Number 9
Final series of Inside Number 9, maybe.
It would probably please them to get a Hannibal Lecter in there somewhere.
Oh, that'd be lovely, wouldn't it? Imagine if they got Tony Hopkins.
Yeah, also a man with time on his hands.
Fucking brilliant. Way too much time on his hands. Have you seen his fucking paintings?
And on that bombshell. Okay, well, I think we'll take a little break, if that's all right with you, John.
More than okay with me. Yeah,
Brilliant.
more than okay.
Brilliant. And then we'll come back and chat about how we're ranking Series 8 at the very end of it.
I'm just going to have a quick bath.
See you shortly. It's degenerated, everyone, if you can hear it. We're going a little bit D-Mob happy here at the end of this series and two quite substantial Jaws podcasts. It's all kind of falling apart at the seams now as we round the last bend. No, we're back to talk about Series 8 and how we'd rank its episodes. We did this for Series 7 last year on Unknightly, and before that on the EscapeGoat Podcast we did this for Series 6, so this will be the third series of Inside Number 9 where we've gone full episode by episode through it, John. And as things exist, that's over a third of Inside Number 9 total. It's been quite the journey.
It has, and in many ways, you've just instantly relieved the pressure from me for ranking these. If you put a gun to my head, I could not tell you what my rankings for those series were.
I remember some bits.
These titles will come out of my mouth and then they'll be gone.
I've noted. I did make a quick note of what our sort of aggregate favourites were from the two previous series that we've done this for. Just because at the end of this one, we've just talked about these episodes rankings. I wanted to sort of mention those to you and just see if not exactly if you think our best of this series are better, because I think that's a very kind of slightly pointless conversation to have. But just to show you sort of the range of the ones that we've liked the most, if you like.
I'd like to say that at some point in the next year or so, whenever season 9 airs and ends, I can see a shared spreadsheet in our future, David.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that is relationship commitment.
I see a shared spreadsheet with you and I separately filling in our top 60 episodes.
Yeah, no, that's probably happening. Let's face it. Well, I guess we'll talk about this as we go through it, but I think in a second, I vaguely remember that what we did last year was that we kind of mentioned our bottom 3 each, and we talked a little bit about that, and then we got into the top 3, which, obviously it becomes apparent at some point, kind of what we probably picked higher up there. But I just want to say, did you, and we'll get into details, obviously, about why, but did you find this quite an easy series to rank now that we've got to this stage?
I honestly can't remember if this is in line with last time. Like the top and the bottom seem to be quite easy. The very top and the very bottom, and maybe even the top 2 and the bottom 2, and then the middle can just go anywhere. They can change constantly depending on what mood I'm in, and also to an extent, I'm conscious of what order they aired in as well, and how fresh they are in my memory, and how fresh it is that I've talked about them, and also particularly having done this, I'm wondering if I'm putting things higher that I found more interesting to talk about, which is not necessarily the same as whether I enjoyed them as much, if you see what I mean, or enjoyed them more than other episodes that I'm putting below them. But I'm gonna have a go and try and I'm gonna try and channel how I felt during the first viewings. And on that, I might move those 2 around actually.
Yeah, mine are on little bits of cards, so I can still move them around.
If I'm doing that, I'm moving those around.
It's again, I won't say which ones yet, but my top 2 were quite easy, and I'd say the whole 4 below that are, I wouldn't say they're quite interchangeable, because I do have reasonings for where I put them, but they did shift a bit.
I'm almost certain that our top 1 is the same, and if it's not, then this ends here and now. Then it's over.
Interesting, because the on Series 6 and Series 7, we did not pick the same favourite for either of those series. So if we do, then that's a new thing. So let's see how this goes. Well, John, why don't you tell me your choices for 6th place, 5th place, and 4th place?
So number 6 is Love as a Stranger.
Okay. I'm going to note these down, by the way, so we can do a quick points thing.
Number 5, The Last Weekend. Number 4, and it's literally just dropped down 1, Bones of St. Nicholas.
Okay, so we can talk a little bit about those. What I will do is I'll tell you my 6, 5, and 4. I've got Mother's Ruin at the bottom. And I've got... So that's at number 6. And at number 5, I've got The Last Weekend. Obviously, I've had the least time to think about that one. But it didn't actually change during our conversation. It was at 5 before we had it, and it's still there. Although I've obviously thought about a few different aspects of it during that.
Yeah, mine too. And I think I found it all very, very interesting. But I enjoyed it enjoyed watching it 5th least.
Yeah, so we both got The Last Weekend at 5. Interesting. And I've got Love Is a Stranger at number 4. So that's in the bottom bit for both of us. I suppose the big outlier here is Mother's Ruin, which you obviously have somewhere in the top 3.
I do.
Yeah, interesting. I think The Last Weekend, I'm left with this overall slight queasiness about it, and we've already sort of litigated that, so I won't get back into that. But the feeling it leaves me is both of being slightly underwhelmed by it. I suppose like admiring them trying something a bit different, a bit remixed at least, and just ultimately, I think honestly, because I'm not afraid of like being a wimp in some respects. This one maybe is just a bit punishing for me. Maybe beyond all the stuff that we were analysing there, this really is just a bit strong. A bit because I was talking before about the Real the Sphinx. Having a lot of that same sort of classical tragedy play in it, and cleverness and reveals upon reveals. And this is maybe just that without the spoonful of sugar, essentially, without some of the crossword based fun and more jokes and outrageous theatrics and stuff. And maybe sometimes I do just want Inside Number 9 to be a bit more fun.
Yeah, I think that's fair as well. And I think as we've said, if you look down this list and again, we've discussed before, what is it they're making? Is it a comedy show? Is it not? Does it have to be? Does it have to declare that's its brilliance? Is that it can be wonderfully funny and it can be not funny at all. But this episode has been short on fun, let's say. It's been short on fun. But for listeners who were taking notes there, you can get away with any level of abuse or torture with David as long as there's crossword-based fun involved.
Yeah, and as long as you don't violate the sanctity of baths, that's what I'm really offended at. That's my safe space.
Step too far.
Well, yeah, and also Love Is a Stranger, because when we talked about that with George, I think we sort of started off saying that was a bit of a Inside Number 9 on easy mode, I suppose, in a sense, like a kind of slightly standard episode. And we also talked, obviously, with George about the predictability for all three of us of the twist. I think that's both those things hobbled it a little bit and probably meant that, I think that's, for me at least, that's probably why it couldn't be in the top three, despite all the very interesting features of it that we discussed and went into. I think that's ultimately, it was just a bit too predictable, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I think again, it's very easy to read too much into this. I think it's very interesting where in the airing order it comes. Let's put it that way. That the arguably most Route 1 predictable Inside Number 9 episode was the one before the most unpredictable Inside Number 9 episode arguably ever. Thus far.
Good point. Well, because we'll talk a bit more about Mother's Ruins when we see where you put it then. What's your number 3?
Number 3 is Mother's Ruin.
Okay, well, over to you then before I'll say what my number 3 is.
I did think this was fun. And it was very much a game of two halves. Brian, the lad's done well. It had that air of seriousness and superstition and the macabre to it, along with Steve Pemberton in a ridiculous wig, doing his little boy voice, and then you had Phil Daniels and Anita Dobson turn up and just swear a lot in Cockney accents, and then it all got absolutely ridiculous. I loved the ridiculousness of it. It was just ridiculous. I didn't find it particularly gory or particularly shocking in any way. I just thought it was it's proper Hammer horror stuff going on there, which I enjoyed it. Like you say, it was fun. I enjoyed watching it. Yeah,
it's interesting actually. I was talking with my partner about the film From Dusk Till Dawn the other day. About kind of the which if anyone's seen that, it's basically a crime drama that becomes a horror.
Yeah, that's a very good shout.
This is kind of that the other way around in a sense, isn't it? It's like a horror, seance based or necromancy based horror that becomes a gangster thing. So there's that. I think the reason it's so low with me, because I should explain why it's at the bottom of my list, really, because it's doing it disservice. Otherwise, I found it a bit charmless. Like, honestly, I think you had a bit more time for it, and back for the sort of character theatrics on it, and I think do you remember I had a bit of trouble with just what it was saying about what the twist was saying essentially, and I suppose what the point of the episode was. It was a bit maybe a bit too throwaway for me, I suppose. Kind of where I land with it. There's nothing offensive about Mother's Ruin. I think for me that's the one where I'm not sure why it's there almost, despite some of that that genre play.
I've said what I have to say. We don't need to debate it. I disagree, sir.
Yeah, which is fine.
Damn your eyes, man.
Damn your eyes, sir. Well, John, I'll reveal what my number 3 is by asking you to pronounce it for me.
Hey! Oh God, hang on. I've shut my notebook. Give me a second.
And now we've had a drink.
Yeah. Paraskevidecatriophobia
is indeed my number 3. I wasn't sure about this one. This one went up and down a bit. I don't think I was going to put it lower than... it wasn't going to be at the bottom. But some of the criticisms that I've thrown at Mother's Ruin, you could throw at this, because I think it is quite light. I described it as quite silly when we first watched it. And
what do you want? Do you want something to be fun, or do you want it to not be too silly, David?
I clearly can't decide, can I? I think ultimately the reason this one stayed with me a bit was the fun of it, and was working out what they were doing with it, but it being a bit of a lighter episode. And I think way back to us talking about Empty Orchestra, I do like it when they're in that mode sometimes, and I liked them doing a fun episode, I suppose, and I thought it was clever enough. There was enough baked into it. Didn't think it was perfect. We talked before about the the sort of childhood trauma bit of it, which I thought felt a bit crowbarred in.
Over-egged, yeah.
Yeah, but it had, we talked before about their use of sort of punchlines to close out episodes. I like that this has a visual punchline, but it didn't make me cringe in the way that some of the actual verbal punchlines did in some of these episodes,
Yeah. Well, that's why I put it in number 2, David, since you ask, and we're going in that order anyway. So yes, I put Paraskevidecatriophobia in at number 2. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it did loads of stuff really, really well, and gave us lots to think about and talk about, both very deep and very silly. Some like really nice knowing gags about the northern accents and things like that. I wasn't even bothered by Dermot O'Leary turning up. I thought that completely worked, which I thought was something that could have utterly failed. I really liked it, and therefore it's straight at number 2.
Well, anyone who's been following, anyone who's been paying attention, which is a minority of people probably at this stage, certainly not us, will know what your number 1 is then. But I'll just say quickly then, my number 2 is The Bones of St. Nicholas. Which I was, we talked about this in the episode, but I was really surprised how that one grew in my estimation, after having been a bit down on it back when it aired at Christmas for reasons we went into then. It really just held together so well. And I loved the neatness of it, I guess, the fun theatricality, all the storytelling in it, the atmosphere of it. I still don't think it's reinventing the wheel in a sense. All the sort of Don't Look Now-esque playing around with future visions and all that sort of stuff, predestination. But it's fun and it works well, and it is spooky and it keeps you guessing. And I liked all the performances. I liked Callow, and I liked the I forget the name, the lady who's in that, the Sunita from Corrie. I still just think of her as.
You mean Shobna Gulati?
I do. Thank you. I'll edit that in.
Fucking hell.
I know.
Do you know what? I think this might be the one I struggled over, actually. This was my last minute switch. The Bones of St. Nicholas went down into the bottom 3 in favour of Mother's Ruin, because again, I was thinking about how I felt when I was watching it, and I think I've really enjoyed The Bones of St. Nicholas with increasing viewings, and I think ultimately it's one that I will likely. I don't know. It's going to be a while before I go back to any of these. I think, but I think if I were to go back to any, I might go back to that over Mother's Ruin. But I think I just pure enjoyed Mother's Ruin more on the actual viewing. But again, I don't know how much of my comprehension was coloured by not entirely following what was going on.
Well, that's been a common theme this series.
And being too obsessed with whether Callow was going to do a Dickens impression or not.
Yeah. Well, you were right. We've both picked the same number 1.
Well, I'm sorry, listeners. That means we will be back to discuss. Season 9. I mean, it has to be. It has to be. It's. I mean, it's probably an instant candidate for top 5 ever. It's just an extraordinary piece of television. It's absolutely wonderful. We largely covered as much as we possibly could last week. But actually, one thing I will add to that as well is I watched this with a friend this week, and it's a friend who I often watch quizzes with, and I often watch University Challenge and Only Connect with on a quizzy Monday. And I gave some context. I didn't entirely want to say, "Oh, do you want to watch this new quiz show?" Because that would be nothing. But I just kind of explained that there was an episode of Inside Number 9 due to air last Thursday, and instead they aired this, and then watched it, and they actually took it almost entirely on face value. In that they were answering the questions and they were kind of going, "Oh my God, what's going on with this mother and daughter? It's kind of it is kind of creepy, and Lee Mack's a really good presenter, isn't he?" And then the last 5 minutes, it was total, it worked beautifully, total bombshell stuff. It was like I think there's as much fun in watching someone else watch this episode as there is in watching it yourself.
Speaking of somebody who watched it with their mum the other day, yes, totally. It's funny actually. I was talking to some friends at the weekend whose job is to make a TV quiz show basically, and one of them had seen it, and they were talking about how it was basically like, especially in terms of like the kind of awkward contestant characters and stuff, how it was basically just too close to home, essentially.
Oh, really close to home. And this is the thing. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but as someone who quite often watches, let's use Only Connect as an example, shall we? The dynamics, the team dynamics are quite often a little bit unusual, because these are quizzes after all. These are people who are really, really good at quizzes, and I try my very, very hardest to be one of that clan, but frankly don't have the memory or the information retention. But quite often it's very well observed, I think, is the slightly rambling point I'm making. I think it is very well observed in terms of the dynamics. And if you think about the first team, the team that goes out first, you don't really have anything much going on. They don't really do much interesting with them. In fact, they're almost intentionally quite dull and quite bland, but they're still very realistically drawn, and it's beautifully portrayed. The other thing I noticed when rewatching it, because we then carried on watching some TV afterwards, and it actually brought to mind something. It brought to mind the day-to-day again, and I had a feeling that I don't think I've really had since back in the late 90s when I used to spend entire afternoons watching the entire series of the day-to-day with some friends around whoever's house happened to be free. And we'd watch, all 3 hours of it back to back.
Yeah.
But then you turn on normal telly, and normal telly is no longer the same. Normal telly now feels like a parody. And actually, this is the first time I've really had that feeling since then, where we turned over and and started watching I think Taskmaster, as it happens. But there was an element of like, is something weird going to happen now? It's almost like it's the kind of television that makes you distrust all other television, and I think that's why it's so special. It's a feeling I've not had since. It is a feeling I've not had since the day-to-day of this has literally warped my mind so much about what I've just watched that I kind of distrust everything else that's now being presented in front of me, and I think that's a remarkable and hugely entertaining and exciting and really wonderful feat. And I think it's it's going to likely to be in my top 5 overall. I think I'd put this over Deadline, to be perfectly honest with you. I think I think this is head and shoulders above that.
Well, I sort of, that's interesting. I sort of stand by what I said on the episode. I think where, in a way, because of it not being broadcast at Halloween, this is kind of a better trick than Deadline in a sense, because of the context. I also think there's something very interesting. I was talking to someone about this. There's something very interesting about. I'll just briefly note these things, I suppose, about the episode because we talked about it at length last week. But there's something interesting about using the dramatic tension of watching a quiz show where the individual audience members' mileage will vary in terms of what answers they know. Because when you watch Catherine and Margaret in this episode, I don't think we've named it yet, 3x3. We mean the bus one. The bus one is what we're talking about. Sorry, Dan. Your mileage will vary based on what the tension of individual scenes, based on whether you know what Ice-T's real name is, for example, things like that. That's an interesting thing to play with. I think we were talking about the mannerisms before of quizzes and the awkwardness of TV quiz shows and the dynamics there. I think it plays really, really nicely, and this isn't something I mentioned last week. It plays really nicely on the fact that we all fill in those blanks. We all, when we're watching a quiz show, we speculate. However casually we're watching it, they'll do something weird. There'll be a weird mannerism or a weird turn of phrase or a weird dynamic between the team, and we don't know what's going on with them and their private lives beyond what they present on the show and edit, obviously. But we have almost like instant headcanon. Like, oh, what's going on with those people? Is that a happy marriage? Is that a good dynamic? Is that a good relationship? That kind of thing. And I think, in portraying the Oakwood characters the way they do and going where they go with it, they know that, right? They must have experienced that, and it's such an interesting mystery to play with, isn't it? And we see these mysterious people on the television all the time, and they're real people, in the most considered to be the most innocuous of TV formats.
Yeah, I'd argue perhaps it's the whichever way you want to look at it, the intellectual or the snobs way of having their reality TV cake and eating their edifying quiz show format.
That's a brilliantly bizarre way to put that.
Thanks.
I love it. I agree. I think it's an instant classic. I just wanted to mention briefly, based on the last series that we discussed. So the episodes that we found, so if you average out our scores last time, the episodes that were at the very top of the tree in Series 6 for us were, I think it was a dead heat between Lip Service and Wuthering Heist. Mm-hmm. And in Series 7, I think, again, it was a bit of a smush between Merrily Merrily and Mr. King overall. So if you put 3x3 right up at the top of that tree and think about how different those episodes are, it's really, that's very impressive, isn't it? We are at the stage of being able to make a sort of super series of Inside Number 9 out of all the best of bits.
Oh God, there's so many. When this is over, there's so many wormholes we're going to go down. 6 best wigs, 6 best supernatural episodes, 6 best non-supernatural episodes, 6 funniest episodes, 6 least funniest episodes.
One thing I meant to mention to you, it's completely not my observation about 3x3 that's come up since we recorded about that, was that that YouTuber Wee Lynn, who does a lot of videos about Inside Number 9, probably some of our listeners have listened to some of her stuff. She noticed that in Love is a Stranger, Steve Pemberton's character has that business solving Rubik's cubes.
Yes.
So you've got the 3x3 grid there, which is exactly like the logo and conceit for 3x3. Which again, we talk about inside this series of Inside Number 9 echoing things that maybe seems like a very, obviously couldn't be decoded beforehand, but that seems like a nice little nod maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of the bits of that episode that kind of didn't make sense why it was there. Why was that his business?
Yeah.
Could have been anything. It seemed like a very, very bizarre one to choose. So you think that's a reference? That's a nod in some way.
Maybe meant to. Again, you talk about the placement of Love is a Stranger. I think maybe it's meant to be this little small thing that will make you laugh in retrospect if you're clever enough, as Wee Lynn was, to spot it.
Wow, they're going like. I don't know how they feel about, I think they perhaps have a complicated relationship with their fans, and how much their fans want them to do certain things, and they're conscious of not wanting to disappoint them or wanting maybe to keep them at a distance, etc., with, one-word tweets, etc. But come on, boys, if you're putting in Easter eggs at that fucking level, I mean, that's insane. If that's
that is insane. Yeah.
If that's an intentional go back and spot the 3x3 link with the Rubik's Cube that didn't really make sense, but now you know what? That's fucking mad.
Yeah, that makes me like 3x3 even more if that is at all deliberate. Well, that's Series 8 then. What a journey! I guess see you this time next year and not beforehand.
Yeah, that's it. It's weirdly, David and I actually don't talk at all.
No.
In between series of Inside Number 9, unless it's about Jaws.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we do make the occasional.
And we've done all that. That's it for this year. So
that's it.
Where are we now? End of May. So solid 7 months at least of not having to deal with it. Well, I mean, unless you somehow magically catch up with Succession in the next 6 months.
Wouldn't bet on
7
it.
months. No, nor would I.
I'll try.
Nor would I. I'll give you $1 million if you do. Come on, kid, you can do it.
See, I got that reference because that's one of the ones I've
give
seen.
you $1 million.
Very, very well done.
My Kieran Culkin impression is.
That's the feedback we're getting, yeah. Well, that's it from Man Ninthly. Bye-bye, John. He's already gone. I'll just turn the lights out. Shut up, shop.